Hey everyone, so 3.5 just got released and it came with 3 new characters in the Genshin TCG game. And this means that we're back to regular programming, we're back to creating more guides and exploring new builds, different decks for these different characters. So with the 3.5 release, we now have Kokomi, we have Kudrosara, and we have Eula. I don't have Kokomi to show off to all of you because I didn't get her. But anyway, these are pretty interesting characters because they all do relatively different things. Kudrosara is kind of like a utility character that deals damage over time, kind of like Fischl, while at the same time she also buffs your team's damage. On the other hand, Kokomi, which is not here, Kokomi is kind of like an aggressive Barbara, whereby she heals your team and she deals damage to your opponent at the same time. I think it'd be really annoying to go against teams with both Kokomi and Barbara at the same time, maybe with a Kea core to it as well. That is basically Nightmare Throw that I don't want to play against. But today we are going to talk about Eula. Why are we going to talk about Eula is because she is pretty interesting as a DPS character. She is able to deal a lot of chip damage, she is able to deal a lot of big damage, but most importantly, she is Cryo. She has access to the Cryo Resonance that gives your attack +2 damage, and she also wields a Claymore, which means that she has access to Wolf's Gravestone, which is a card that everyone knows that I love. Because if you look at all of my different guides, if there is a Claymore character, if there are 2 Claymore characters, there will be Wolf's Gravestone. So yeah, just to kind of give a bit of spoiler, I am going to build a deck. I'm going to show a deck with Eula in its core, and it's going to be a melt focused Claymore deck, right? So first off, before we go into the team, let's look at Eula as a character, what makes her special, and what are some ways that we can play her. So this is Eula as a character, and most people may ask the question, is Eula really a burst heavy, big damage DPS dealer? Or is she more of a support DPS, more of a sub DPS whereby she just chips damage off your opponents? So to me, she is flexible enough to be both. Most people might think that she is just a sub DPS because if you look at all of her different attacks, she only deals 2 damage if there are no buffs. For example, look at her normal attack, 2 physical damage, elemental skill, 2 cryo damage with if there are no additional buffs, and for her elemental burst, also 2 cryo damage if there are no additional buffs. But I feel like to me, she is primarily a sub DPS that is very good at chipping damage off your opponents, very good at dealing cryo damage to your opponents, so that the rest of your team can either apply melt damage, uh, maybe even superconduct or freeze, right? But most importantly, I feel like Eula is really unique because she's able to switch it up and be a huge damage dealer. And I'm gonna show you what I mean. So my primary use of Eula, just to reiterate, my primary use of Eula is still as a sub DPS. I feel like she is very good at chipping damage, but if your opponent doesn't respect her, if your opponent isn't careful, she can take out wins and she can knock out your opponent with huge damage quite easily as well. So looking at her attacks, normal attack, dealing 2 physical damage, nothing to write home about. This is just your basic normal attack. But the elemental skill is where it starts to get interesting because, for a cost of 3 cryo dice, you only do 2 cryo damage. It seems a little bit underwhelming, but it says that if Eula doesn't have a Grimheart, they will gain Grimheart. What is Grimheart? Essentially, Grimheart is just this little thing that sits in the background of Eula's card. And it says that the next time you use your elemental skill, you'll be able to remove this to add 2 more damage to Eula's elemental skill damage. So essentially, the first time you attack with this is going to deal 2 damage. The second time you attack with this is going to deal 4 damage, right? And people might ask, hey, is that a good or bad thing? Because, essentially, um, most other characters, their elemental skill deals 3 damage anyway, right? So if you split things by 2 and 4 damage, is it really going to make that much of a difference? Because but if you attack across 2 different actions, right, you're still going to um, deal 6 damage through the use of 6 cryo dice. And to me, it is going to make a difference because Eula will be able to use her first elemental skill to chip your opponent's HP down. And when they are not careful, you can just keep that Grimheart all the way in the back. If they're not careful, you swap, the game progresses, you swap your team around. Suddenly, your opponent has a character that only has 4 HP left. They forget about Eula, Eula comes out, and Eula deals 4 damage out of nowhere. And I have won a couple of games because of this particular interaction, so I do think that her elemental skill is a force to be reckoned with. Next up, we have her Elemental Burst. It also works quite similarly to her skill. So Eula is just, a character that likes to surprise your enemies, I guess, because if you look at it, her Elemental Burst, she only deals 2 cryo damage, right? But it also has an additional effect. Basically, you summon one Light Force Sword. What the Light Force Sword does is essentially every time you attack, every time you normal attack or elemental skill, when this Light Force Sword is present, you will be able to accumulate 2 Zeus stacks, right? So during the end phase, your Light Force Sword will burst. Light Force Sword deals 2 damage, and with each Zeus stack that you have to this attached to this particular Light Force Sword, you'll be able to deal 1 more damage per Zeus stack. So this can actually make Eula into quite a big bomb, especially with it in conjunction with a specialization skill, right, which I will go into later. But essentially, this is pretty powerful because you can have the Elemental Burst. Let's say you set up the Elemental Burst in the previous turn. Your turn starts, you do this Elemental Burst, dealing 2 damage to your opponent, creating the Light Force Sword. Let's say you have an additional cryo dice or some way that you can give a discount, right? You can attack twice. Let's say the worst case scenario, you attack twice with your normal attack. It means that you plus 2 damage, 2 damage. That is a total of 6 damage dealt by Eula so far. At the end of the turn, Light Force Sword bursts, dealing a total of 4 damage because it has, that has the Light Force Sword damage, and then it also has the Zeus stacks as well. Sorry, no, it will actually deal 6 damage because every time you attack, it will accumulate 2 Zeus stacks. So essentially, if you have 9 dice in total, if you use Elemental Burst and you spam the normal attack, you'll be able to deal a total of 12 damage using Eula. At the start of the game, this might be a way to knock out one character directly. Towards the middle, towards the end game, actually having 12 damage split across multiple actions, multiple instances, it could mean, knocking out 2 different characters at the same time, because Eula can, actively deal 6 damage to your opponent's active character, right? And towards the end of the turn, when the Light Force Sword breaks, she deals 6 more damage, hopefully, knocking out the other character as well. So I think Eula is a very interesting character to play, mainly because I like to play mid-range decks, and I really like how flexible it is. It's very, but that said, it is very interesting to kind of note that there are kind of some ways, some tips and tricks that we can use in order to maximize the damage that is dealt by Eula. For example, through the use of her specialization, and Eula is also capable of dealing some FTKs, some first turn kills. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about Eula's specialization and talk about what are some of the best ways that you can combine her specialization and the remaining of her skills so that you can maximize the damage that is being dealt by Eula. So this is Eula's specialization skill. It is a talent skill called Wellspring of Warlust. It is basically an elemental burst talent skill, which means that you need her burst to be online in order to play it. Some people may not like that because they would say, oh yeah, even if I have the elemental dice, I can't play it, therefore it's too conditional. It's very difficult for you to, draw this at the right time, right? You need the burst, you need the elemental dice, and then you need the right time to play it as well. So it's a whole bunch of conditions you need to fulfill in order to play this efficiently, but it's still day 1 of patch 3.5. I would say give it a go, try it out first. But let me tell you how I am finding this card so far. So right now, I really like this because it can threaten so much damage, right? When you use this card, it means that you'll be able to use the Elemental Burst immediately, right? And it says, whenever you use your Elemental skill, you'll be able to generate one more Zeal for your Lightfall Sword. So what does the combo, what does the damage look like? So let's say your Eula's burst is already set up, it is the start of your turn. You go into your Eula, you use your Elemental Burst dealing 2 damage and summoning 1 Lightfall Sword. The next thing you do is that you use your Elemental skill for the first time, dealing 2 more damage, gaining Grimheart, and then you'll also be able to get 3 Zeus on your Lightfall Sword. Okay? So remember the math now. It's now 4 damage, Grimheart is on, Lightfall Sword has 3 Zeus. Let's say you have another Cryo Dice because of Cryo Dice or Paimon, whatever. You use the Elemental skill again. Because of Grimheart, you now deal 4 damage, right? Because Grimheart adds 2 damage to your Elemental skill. So it means that Eula for this turn has dealt a total of 8 damage through the use of her burst and her 2 Elemental skills. On top of that, because she's using her Elemental skill again, she's able to get 3 more Zeal stacks. So this means that her Lightfall Sword has a total of 6 Zeal stacks at the moment. So recapping on the maps again, Eula has dealt 8 damage in this turn, and she has 1 Lightfall Sword with 6 Zeal stacks. So with 1 Lightfall Sword, you can deal 2 damage. With 6 Zeal stacks, you can deal 6 more damage. So it means that Eula is going to deal a total of 16 damage in this turn. And previously I explained that, hey, if you use your burst and use your normal attack, you can deal a total of 12 damage. It is pretty respectable in the mid to late game because most of your opponents might be down to 6 HP, and therefore it is very possible to get the double knockout. But if towards the mid to late game, if you deal a total of 8 plus 8 damage, it is almost guaranteed, right? I don't know the maths, I can't give you the maths here, but you probably definitely will knock out 2 characters at the same time in the same turn. So Eula is super powerful. I really like her. She is very fun to play. I like fun characters and she is indeed very fun to play. So that is basically how you can maximize the utility of her specialization. Basically, somehow have 9 dice through the use of your additional Cryo dice or through the use of Paimon. Use your burst, use your elemental skill twice, deal 16 damage, boom. So that is Eula and her specialization. Now let's talk about team composition. If you look at my previous few guides and videos, every time I play Diluc, Chongyun is around as well, right? Because both of these guys, they can use Wolf Gravestone. And you already know how much I love Wolf Gravestone because it's just insane, right? For the cost of 3 dice towards the late game, you can add 3 damage to your attacks if your opponent has 6 or less HP. This is game ending in the very late game. I love this card, and that's why every time I play Diluc, there's always Chongyun, because you have your Wolf Gravestone that both of them can use, and then you also have you're also able to create some melt reaction between these two for big damage. Another reason why I like these 2 cards is because they deal huge burst damage, right? Like Diluc is able to deal 8 damage, Chongyun is able to deal 7 damage. So these 2 are monsters in their own rights. And what better to, improve this team by adding another monster in Eula herself, who is also able to deal 16 damage in 1 turn. So what is the team synergy like? What is this team trying to do? Essentially, this team is it might look like a suicidal team because all of them do big damage. All of them, like Diluc and Chongyun, need a lot of energy in order to set up their burst. It seems like you just send one of them, deal as much damage, and then they die. But the way that I like to think about this team is that you can easily threaten first turn kills or second turn kills through the use of Eula and Chongyun, right? So if the cards permit, use one of them to knock out 1 character first, so that you can reduce the number of play patterns your opponents can have. That's strategy number 1, if you will. Strategy number 2, basically you would want to use either Eula or Chongyun to apply as much cryo across your opponent's team as possible and also chip their HP down as much as possible. Once you've done that, in the late game, you send out Diluc to do big melt damage. And this is not just big melt damage, right? If let's say Chongyun and Eula already do cryo damage to your opponent, they have cryo applied. Diluc comes out, Diluc uses his elemental skill, dealing 3 cryo damage plus 2 melt damage, a total of 5 damage. And don't forget, this is a cryo team. With a cryo team, you're able to use Elemental Resonance Shattering Ice, which increases the next attack by 2 damage. So that means that Diluc's elemental skill, it might look very innocent, but the moment you use Eula and Chongyun to spread ice across your opponent's team, Diluc's elemental skill is able to do a total of 7 damage, right? Because it's able to do 3 power damage plus 2 melt damage plus 2 shattering ice damage. And that should probably knock out a character. If it doesn't knock out a character, I'll be very angry because it means that they probably have 1 or 2 HP left. So that is the second strategy for this team. So basically, just to summarize, right? What are you trying to do with this team? First strategy, either use Chongyun or Eula for first turn kill or second turn kills. I can go through that in greater detail later. Second thing you want to do is that you want to use Eula and Chongyun to apply as much cryo as possible across your opponent's team, chip them down as much as possible, and then end the game with Diluc. So what this means is that always protect your Diluc, don't let him get caught off guard, don't let him get force swapped out, because the moment you lose Diluc, you don't lose instantly because Eula and Chongyun can still deal a lot of damage by themselves, but it does mean that the game is more difficult to play. So that is basically the team synergy, and let's go into what Diluc and Chongyun can do in this particular team. Let's talk about Chongyun first because I'd like to talk about strategy number 1, which is looking at how we can do like a threaten a second turn kill, right? So essentially, Chongyun is pretty powerful because he is able to deal elemental damage quite easily. He's able to apply cryo damage across your opponent's entire team through the use of his elemental skill. Through the use of the Chonghua Layered Frost, essentially he will deal 3 cryo damage and then create 1 Chonghua Frost Field. And this Chonghua Frost Field essentially says that all of your characters who are using Sword, Claymore, and Polearms, their physical damage will be converted into cryo damage. So this essentially turns characters like Diluc into a self-sustaining melt engine because you can use Chongyun to deal 3 cryo damage, you switch over to Diluc. Diluc can use the elemental skill to deal 5 total of 5 cryo damage, and you know, if your opponent switches it away, Diluc might say, hey, you know what, it's fine that you swapped over to your character that now has 10 HP. I don't mind that. I'm going to use my normal attack, dealing 2 cryo damage to your new character, and then I'm gonna do it all over again. I'm gonna do another 5 damage to your character, and that would leave your opponent with 2 characters on 3 HP by the middle of turn 2, which is pretty powerful, right? So Chongyun as a melt engine is just filthy. Like he's disgusting. He's really powerful. But the key thing I want to focus on with Chongyun is not just about how he can melt or how he can set up a melt for your team, but more importantly, his elemental burst is really powerful as well. Because if you look at his kit, right, other than dealing elemental skill, he needs 3 energy in order to set up his elemental burst, and his elemental burst is able to do 7 cryo damage, which is a lot because if you deal 1 elemental skill, that's already 3 damage. If you deal the elemental burst, it's a total of 10 damage. It should knock out any of the characters. So with Chongyun, the moment you set up his burst, one of your opponent's characters is almost dead, right? So the way that you can set this up, the way that you can set Chongyun's second turn kill very easily is essentially on your first turn, what you want to do is that you want to have this particular guy 2 cards in your hand, right? And it can be either or. You can either have Iron Tang Tian in your hand, or you can have the Northern Smoked Chicken in your hand as well. Well, of course, you can also have the elemental dice, right? Because if you attack one more time, you can get one more energy. But essentially, what you want to do, there are two ways to do this. Essentially, you attack with Chongyun's elemental skill or normal attack. You attack with him twice, and then with his remaining two dice, you can either use Iron Tang Tian, and then you wait it out. You tell your opponent, hey, I'm gonna end my turn now. Um, Chongyun's gonna get one energy from Iron Tang Tian, which means that if I start next turn, your active character is going to die. So basically, you're telegraphing your burst attack to your opponent and forcing them to swap or forcing them to sacrifice a character, right? So that is quite a powerful move. Is quite a big flex, and I like to play that. The second way that you can go about this is that if you have the Northern Smoked Chicken, you can essentially attack with Chongyun twice, and then you can attack with him a third time with your normal attack. And that by attacking three times in your first turn, you're able to set up your elemental burst and then go in for the turn to kill. So the question here might be, if I have both Iron Tang Tian and Northern Smoked Chicken in my hand, what do I want to go for? Do I want to go for Iron Tang Tian or do I want to go for um, the Northern Smoked Chicken? Because there are two different types of benefits here, right? If you are using Northern Smoked Chicken, it means that you can attack one more time, and it also means that you can do 2 more damage to your opponent's character. If you use Iron Tang Tian, it means that if you attack twice, and if you are the active player, you'll be able to cast Iron Tang Tian end your turn first, which guarantees that you start the round next round, and then it means that Chongyun can go in and do big damage before your opponent can react. So this is a very good question as to which one you should go for first. I personally feel like if your opponent has already switched over to another character, which means that even if you end your turn now, your opponent is currently sitting on a 10 HP character because they swapped over to something else, I would highly recommend using the Northern Smoked Chicken to chip 2 more damage to your opponent's active character so that they go down to 8 damage, right? But if your opponent has decided to use all of their dice to set up, if they are not able to switch, if they are stuck with their character that has 6 HP left or what have you, right? Or 5 HP left, essentially I would play Iron Tang Tian and I will end my turn to guarantee that Chongyun goes first in the next round and kills off their active character. So, if going back to this Northern Smoked Chicken strategy, what if I play Northern Smoked Chicken, right, on my and then I deal 2 damage to their new character, which means that their new character currently has 8 HP. Even if I have Chongyun's burst online, they don't die, right? And that is when Shattering Ice is super critical. I've quite a few games whereby I managed to knock out my opponent's characters on turn 2 because of Shattering Ice. So essentially, by dealing 2 damage, I bring my opponent's HP down to 8 HP, right? And then at the start of my next turn, my opponent might think, oh wow, well, Chongwei is only able to do 7 damage, it leaves my character at 1 damage, at 1 HP, and therefore it doesn't die. But if I have Shattering Ice, I will be able to do 9 damage instead, and therefore be able to kill off their character. So I think Chongyun as a character, he is really a bomb. He is a character that he deals damage in ways that no one can really predict, right? Even if he seems like he's going to leave your opponent on 1 HP, if you draw the right cards, you'll be able to buff it up to 9 damage, right? And be able to knock out that character on turn 2. And knocking out a character on turn 2 is very crippling to your opponent because it means that they might have lost one of their combo pieces, they might have reduced the play pattern, the variations that they can do on their turn. So yeah, I really like Chongyun for this team for these 2 particular purposes. Firstly, deal Cyro across the board. Secondly, deal big damage and take out an opponent on turn 2. Next up, we have Diluc as the second character, or rather, is the third character because Eula is the first character and Chongyun is the second character. So Diluc is the third character of this team. You've seen multiple guides from me with Diluc in the team. What does he do? He goes in, deals big pyro damage, and deals big elemental burst damage. What else is there to say about him? He's just great, right? So some people like to play Diluc in pyro-focused teams so that they can play the pyro resonance. But I believe that the pyro resonance is a much superior version of the pyro resonance, because the pyro resonance essentially says that it will deal +2 damage if it is a pyro-related elemental reaction. Whereas for Shattering Ice, it deals +2 damage regardless of what kind of damage you're dealing. So if Diluc is on, he comes in, or rather if any of the other characters are on, you can even play it and deal +2 physical damage, dealing a total of 4 damage through the use of your normal attack. And that can be game ending, right? Because there are lots of different freeze decks. There are lots of different hydro decks running around at the moment because people are experimenting with Kokomi, experimenting with Barbara, experimenting with Mona. And what this means is that your opponent is going to apply hydro application on themselves. You can use Chongyun or you can use Eula to basically freeze them, and then you can use Diluc with his big normal attack. You can break the ice, or you can use his pyro damage for even more damage, right? So Diluc is very well positioned in the meta right now from my perspective. And even though his elemental burst is a bit pricey, it costs 4 dice and it costs 3 energy as well, but I really think that 8 pyro damage is pretty crippling, right? Because essentially, let's say if your cryo setup is correct, Chongyun deals a cryo reaction or cryo application to everyone, right? Or even Eula is able to do that. If you have cryo application across the board, you use Diluc, Elemental Burst, you deal 8 damage, you probably knock out that one. Your opponent swaps into someone else, and now Diluc has Pyro Infusion, right? And then you use your normal attack, and that means that with your normal attack, you'll be able to do an additional 5 damage to your opponent. And in the late game, that is super critical. That is probably game ending, right? So Diluc as a character, do keep him alive, right? Be sure that he is there as your pivot player. He is the one that can help you to win tempo back. He is the one that can help you to deal big melt damage to knock out your opponent's characters, and then take the win for the rest of the few remaining turns. So yeah, nothing else to say about Diluc. Solid character in general. Play more character, and yeah, big damage with Diluc, big damage with Melt, big damage with Shattering Ice, and big damage with Wolf's Gravestone. So next up, let's talk about your ideal opening hand. So as mentioned earlier, really early on in the video, this team is capable of picking up first turn kills, FTKs. And I'm going to show you which are the cards you need to pick up in order to do an FTK. I'm not suggesting that we always aim to mulligan such that we only do FTK, because even if we fail to get all of the puzzle pieces, these cards are still critical to this particular team. So just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to walk you through what the cards are. I'm going to walk you through the FTK strategy. I'm also going to show you if you only get one part of the puzzle, you don't get all the pieces, why it is still an ideal hand. So firstly, the cards that you really want would be the Woven Ice, the additional dice. You want Shattering Ice, the elemental resonance. And you also want the Northern Smoked Chicken. These are the 3 cards that you definitely need in order to execute that FTK strategy. If you already have one of each, right, what are the other cards that you might want to roll for as well? Personally, I like to roll for Iron Tang Tian, and I also like to roll for either Bestest Travel Companion or Toss Up, just to reroll, because this is a very elemental dice hungry team. Okay, so just to recap, what are the cards that we want? We want the Cryo Dice, we want Shattering Ice, we want Northern Smoked Chicken, we want Iron Tang Tian, and we want either Bestest Companion or reroll. Okay. Next up, I'm going to show you a video example of what the FTK can look like, what the variations of the FTK can look like, and then after that, I will also let you know if we can't play the FTK, why these cards are still the right cards to start the game with. Okay, so this is a recording not against a real player, but just against Yoimiya, the CPU. Not because I want to bully her, but I just want to show you that it is possible that Eula can pick up a first turn kill if your opponent does not respect what Eula can do and the different hidden ways that she can bring damage out onto the field. So this is just one example. I'm going to show you the other combos that you can do as well. But essentially, in this game, I managed to roll for a few things. I managed to roll for 2 Cyro dice and 2 Shattering Eyes. And this is one example, this is one set of what you need in order to execute this combo. Essentially, what you want to do is that you start the turn with Eula, right? Start the game with Eula. You roll the dice and you pray that you get lots of different Cyro dice, which I actually do. In this example, I get a total of, I believe, 6 playable dice. Okay. Next up, what we want to do is that we basically do the elemental skill on Yoimiya. Why do we do that? We do that because it gives us the Grimheart, right? So we do 2 damage to Yoimiya, right? And then after that, Yoimiya does all of the stuff, just doing the setup, doing her fire dance, and then this is when we do Shattering Ice damage, right? By playing the Shattering Ice, Eula is now able to do a total of 4 damage with her normal attack, right? And then after that, what you want to do is that you play both of your elemental dice, and then because your Grimheart is active, you'll be able to do a total of 4 more damage against Yoimiya. And that is how essentially you get a first turn kill, and this is just one example. So there are multiple ways for you to get the first turn kill. So that was the video example that I gave was just one combination. I just want to show you how it looks like with your ideal hand size as well, or your ideal starting hand. Essentially, you have your Shattering Eyes, your Woven Eyes, you have the Northern Smoked Chicken, you have Iron Tang Tian, and you have Reroll as well. So essentially, at the start of your turn, with your 8 dice count, you just go into Eula, you use her elemental skill, deal 2 Cyro damage, and create Grimheart. With this, you'll be able to do 2 damage. Next up, what you want to do is that you use the elemental skill again, dealing 4 more damage because of the Grimheart, dealing a total of 6 damage, and you will have 2 dice left. What you want to do next is that you play Woven Eyes, go up to 3 dice count, you play Shattering Eyes, going back down to 2, but your next attack gains +2, and then you play the Northern Smoked Chicken, and then you'll be able to deal 4 physical damage with 2 dice, dealing a total of 10 damage. So if your opponent does not respect Eula, does not respect Chongyun, and decides to just stay in the same character and set up for the rest of the turn, that is basically how you can use the FTK. Some people might say, hey, you have to be really, really lucky in order to get correct dice count for this. I agree with that, which is why I think it's ideal for you to get Toss Up or Best Companion in your hand. But essentially only do this if you are sure you can get the FTK. Do not overcommit your resources, do not let Eula take too much damage just to do the FTK. But I just want to show that it is possible to get FTK in multiple ways with this deck. And people might also ask, hey, it seems like Eula is not doing anything too special, because if she attacks twice with elemental skill, she deals 6 damage with the use of 6 dice. So does this mean that I can do this FTK with Chongyun as well, or must it be only specific to Eula? So the answer is you can also do it with Chongyun, but I'm doing it with Eula in this instance because this is a Eula video, so that's the only reason why. But yeah, I would also recommend that, actually, ideally, the smarter play might be to do this FTK play with Chongyun instead, because if you can tell that your opponent is switching around, and if you think you don't want to overcommit to all of your resources, you want to leave some of these cards for the next turns, essentially you can start to deal damage with Chongyun, right? And then instead of playing all of these cards, you can play Iron Tang Tian and set up for the next turn burst, and therefore going pivoting from a first turn kill to a second turn kill. So I would recommend that you go into Chongyun for this FTK instead, but it is also worthwhile using Eula for this FTK sometimes as well, especially if you happen to have that Elemental Burst specialization card in your hand. So even if you don't take out the FTK, or rather you don't take out an opponent using an FTK, you'll be able to set up your burst for the next turn, which is pretty powerful as well. And dealing, I think the math was what, 6 plus 6 damage, right? Minimally. So yeah, this is the second way that you can conduct FTK with this particular deck. So now that we've talked about the ideal hand, what the ideal FTK turns can look like, let's talk a little bit about what the ideal first turn looks like, because your ideal first turn may not necessarily be an FTK. As I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about the second example of the FTK combo, essentially, from my perspective, right, I feel like the better starter out of these three characters is actually Chongyun. I feel like Chongyun is a really good starter because of how flexible he is. He can basically set up the field with crowd application across all of your different opponents through the use of the Chonghua-Force field and his normal attacks. He is able to deal very big elemental burst damage at the start of turn 2 for some second turn kill, and he is also able to use the cards the same way that Eula can in order to deal FTK. So for me, the ideal starter in this particular team is actually Chongyun. So what I would do is that I would send him out first, and then depending on what my cards are, hopefully I'll be able to, it will really determine what I want to do. So hopefully I'll be able to get cards such as Iron Tongue Tian, I'll be able to get the Elemental Dice, be able to get the Northern Smoke Chicken. What I want to do at the start of this, during turn 1, right, is that I would probably prefer to attack twice with Chongyun, right? And then see what my opponent is trying to do. Is my opponent trying to swap around the different teams to spread damage? If they are trying to do that, I would definitely want to set up Iron Tongue Tian to knock out one of their characters on turn 2. Or is their team something that really relies on particular pivot player? For example, do they need Kole? Do they need Xingqiu? If yes, then I would definitely find a way to set up Iron Tongue Tian so that I can get that turn 2 kill as well. But if my opponent is really just trying to soak up damage, just trying to, soak up, recover, rinse and repeat, what I actually want to do is to use the Chonghua Layered Frost, start to deal Cyro damage, and if I have another dice, I'll attack once more. But what I would actually do after that with the remaining 3 dice is that I want to play Paimon or I want to play Libin. Because what I want to do is that I would want to get additional dice so that I can attack more times and get more cards as well through the use of Libin. If I were to set up this way, I will actually deal Cyro damage using Chongyun and then swap over to Diluc and start doing Diluc melt shenanigans. For example, the combo I was telling you guys about in the earlier part of the video, right? Essentially, with Diluc, you can use his normal attack, deal Cyro damage, and then go over to his elemental skill to deal melt damage, dealing a total of 7 HP through the use of just 6 elemental dice. So 6 elemental dice, with Paimon on, you have the total of 10. You can even attack once more, and if you attack once more, you can also use cards such as Gambler's Earrings to knock out one character and attack one additional time. So what does that mean for this team in summary? It means that I like to start out with Chongyun, and I want to try to figure out what my opponent is doing. If they're relying on one particular character, I want to set up the burst on turn 2 to knock out that character. If they're trying to swap around and recover, I want to use Diluc to deal mount damage continuously. If they are trying to do funny shenanigans whereby they just kind of block shield over and over again, I would actually prefer to go into Eula to deal a lot of 2 damage chip damage so that I can waste things such as their shield, I can waste their lotus, and then hopefully set up the burst so that I can continue to deal 2 crowd damage plus whatever light force sword damage as well. So that is basically my general thought process of what the ideal turn 1 can be and how it leads into your second and third turns. Now that we've looked at what the ideal turn 1 is, let's talk about the equipment package for this particular team. So we only run 3 types of equipment. The first one is Eula's talent. Some I would strongly recommend that all of us experiment with it. I agree that, since it's a burst related talent, it may not be super efficient because it's very conditional, but just have a go. Maybe you might like it, but if you don't like it, I actually highly recommend you using Diluc specialization instead, because it feels a lot more consistent and it can do a lot more damage. Because with the use of Diluc specialization, essentially you'll be able to use the elemental skill once more with the cost of 1 less dice, and essentially you can attack 3 times with the elemental skill using 8 dice, and on the 3rd time you attack with the elemental skill, it actually deals +2 damage, which is pretty powerful. So I feel like, if you don't like this, check out Diluc's specialization. Next up, we have Wolf's Gravestone. Nothing else can be said because I've already showered on my love on this. I love Wolf's Gravestone, just play it. And then finally, we have Gambler's Glass as well. No, Gambler's Earrings. We have Gambler's Earrings, and I really like Gambler's Earrings because essentially, towards the mid-game, right, that's when characters like Chongyun and Diluc want to pick up kills. After they pick up kills, if you have Gambler's Earrings, essentially you can extend your turn by creating more Omni Dice. Even if you can't attack once more, even if you can't attack again with your burst or whatever, at least with that 2 Omni Dice, you can either feed it to Liban, or you can even, spend 1 Cryo Dice here and feed it to Paimon so that she gives you more and more resources in the turns to come. So I really like the 3 equipment that I have in this particular deck so far. Next up, we have our dice farming / dice cheating package. It's the usual, it's your girl Paimon. You pay 3, you get 2 Omni Element dice over the course of the next 2 rounds. You also have Liban. From my perspective, if I have the choice, would I rather play Paimon or play Liban? I know that they have different conditions. Paimon needs 3 of the same elemental dice, Liban needs 3 different elemental dice, but to me, in this particular deck, I actually prefer Liban over Paimon. Reason for that is because with Liban, I'll be able to draw 2 cards as well, and it might help me to draw really critical cards such as Shattering Ice for the extra 2 damage, or it might also help me to get things like Northern Smoked Chicken, and also help me to get things like Send-Off, because right now with Kokomi running around, with Kudrosara running around, with Eula running around, Send-Off is actually really good, which is one thing I forgot to mention, but essentially Send-Off is a menace, but I will get into that in the later portion. So I would prefer Liban over Paimon. And then finally, your other dice cheating package, essentially you have your Woven Ice, you have Bestest Companion, so that you can increase the consistency of this deck by converting elemental dice into Omni dice, and you also have the Toss Up, which can help you to reroll up to 2 times. And the final dice cheating card that you have is I Haven't Lost Yet. For basically, whenever one of the characters defeated this round, if you play this for a cost of 0, you'll be able to create 1 Omni Element dice and also gain 1 energy as well, which can make for some pretty surprising elemental bursts against your opponents if they're not suspecting it. So that's basically the dice cheating dice farm package. Next up, we have our energy farming package, and in which we have Iron Tongue Tian. I've already spoken about how he is super critical to this particular team because he is able to set up a turn 2 burst attack from Chongyun, right? Apart from that, Diluc is a very energy hungry character. You want to set him up somehow for the mid game so they can take some knockouts and take the tempo. And therefore, I really like Iron Tongue Tian because he is able to give any character without maximum energy 1 energy. So Iron Tongue Tian, hands down, the better of the 2 here. The second energy character that I play is Liu Su. He only costs 1, but the downside of him is that you must switch into a character with no energy in order to make use of Liu Su's ability. So in some other decks, such as, I don't know, the Quicken decks, etc., I find that I like Liu Su there a lot more, but in this particular deck, Liu Su can be a little bit awkward because with this deck, I already use a lot of my characters to do chip damage, right? I use Eula, I use Chongyun to do chip damage, and therefore, these 2 characters are likely to already have at least 1 energy. So even if I play Liu Su, he would not be that useful for them. and therefore I don't think I really love Liu Su in here, but I'm still willing to give him a try. If Liu Su ends up not being a pick for me in this deck, the other card I'm actually thinking about is Star Signs, because with the cost of 2 and getting 1 more energy in a pinch, it can be really good for you to set up your Elemental Burst for Diluc and Chongyun and catch your opponents off guard. So Liu Su is a maybe 70% for me. I can be convinced to play something else. So for the rest of the cards, we have some um, cards. We got some food cards. For example, not a smoked chicken, really know what it's for. Mondstadt Hash Brown, you know, pay 1, heal 2. It gives this team a bit more survivability because this team is not super tanky. They like to deal a lot of damage, but they take time to set up, and therefore having a bit of recovery is pretty nifty. We also have Leave It To Me. I only play one of this because I just don't really have the space to fit in another one. But I like having a one-off, right? Because I don't need it all the time. But if I can catch my opponent off guard and suddenly swap in to Diluc and do some surprise melt energy, or sorry, so some surprise melt damage, it can help to get knockouts. And finally, the boogeyman of this meta and the boogeyman of this team as well is actually Sendoff. So Sendoff is really good in the current meta because lots of people like to play Pokemon decks, they like to play Zoo decks, they like to play summoning decks. Even this deck in itself is kind of has some sort of a summoning element to it. With Eula, when you play her Elemental Burst, she summons 1 Light Force Sword. And imagine this, you play her Elemental Burst, you set up Light Force Sword, you get 6 stacks onto it, you should be able to do 8 damage to it, but before your opponent ends their turn, they actually play Send Off, and then deleting that 8 damage. So Eula is a double-edged sword in this instance because she can deal a lot of damage in an instant, but if your opponent has Send Off, essentially that burst is useless. So I like to have 1 copy of Send Off. I might have 2 if I were to take out another Leave It To Me, I might be able to fit 1 more. But having 1 copy of Send Off at least is really good in this current meta. It gets rid of the threat that Eula brings. It gets rid of a lot of summons from Kokomi and Cyro. Also get rid of some of the more annoying summons such as in Fischl and Kole and also in Notion. So Send Off is both a really good card in this deck, but also the Achilles heel of this deck if you rely on Eula a little bit too much. So yeah, that is everything. That is all the cards that we have in this current deck. So just to summarize, what does this deck want to do? Essentially with this deck, what you want to do is to chip damage with Eula and Chongyun, deal Cyro damage across your opponent's field, and then take late game melt knockouts through the use of Diluc. And in order to spice up your game plan a little bit, you don't just, deal chip damage all the time. If your opponent does not respect your Eula or your Chongyun, essentially you'll be able to deal a first turn kill through the two different combinations I've just walked you through it in the earlier chapter. And you can also use Chongyun to set him up for a second turn kill through the use of his burst. So I really like this deck because it deals so much pressure against your opponents the moment they see your energy build up. So fun deck, essentially chip damage with a threat of FTK or second turn kill, and also a lot of melt energy, or rather melt damage from Diluc. So yeah, have fun with this deck. I hope you like it. If you've listened to me ramble thus far, if you're not already subscribed, like and subscribe. If you want more of such content, I'll probably do a deck guide for Kokomi and Cyro as well, but I need a bit more time to experiment with them. But yeah, after this, let's go on into the gameplay and look at how this deck functions in actual gameplay against real opponents, not Yoimiya. Alright, see you in a bit. Alright, so in our first game, we have a match against another Ayaka Freeze team, but this time with Kokomi. So we have Ayaka, Kokomi, and Xingqiu, and when I first saw this deck, my initial reaction is that I probably need to try to get rid of Xingqiu as soon as possible, because that is the card that enables the freeze mechanic within this team very consistently. I was actually a little bit nervous about having Kokomi on the team because Kokomi can give Xingqiu that little bit of extra survivability through the use of her recovery, but I just thought that Xingqiu was still the primary threat. So with that in mind, I can tell that I need to get rid of Kokomi and Xingqiu as soon as possible. And Ayaka is not really a threat too much on her own, right? So with that in mind, I decided to go into Chongyun first because I was trying to set up a turn 2 knockout either against Kokomi or Xingqiu. Preferably Xingqiu, but you know, my opponent is smart as well. They can tell that I am trying to get rid of their pivot character, and therefore they decided to send in Kokomi first to do some chip damage on me, apply Hydro on me, and therefore enable freeze against me as well. So Chongyun has taken 1 damage from Kokomi, and what I'm trying to do here is to decide how I want to split the damage against my opponent and set up my burst damage, because as you can see in my hand, I have an additional Cyro dice as well, which allows me to attack a 3rd time and therefore set up the burst efficiently. So what I've decided to go with is that I just went with the additional I just went with the elemental skill first. Reason for that is because I was hoping for my opponent to kind of change into another character, just swap into another character, right? So that if I were to attack, if they were to swap in and I have the Chonghua Fuse set up, it means that I can spread my Cyro resonance across to the different teams. But it seems like they didn't really do much about it. They just kind of kept Kokomi in place. And now I'm thinking, do I want the Northern Smoked Chicken so that I can deal damage and also play the Shattering Ice at the same time, bringing Kokomi just down to 1 HP. It may be a bit greedy of me, but I decide to do it anyway because I really wanted to knock out 1 character as soon as possible. And I decided to burn the Send Off, which in hindsight is probably a pretty bad idea because Kokomi and Ayaka can both do a lot of they can create their own summons, right? Like Kokomi has a healing summon, Ayaka has a burst summon. So that was probably a bad idea from my end to get rid of the Send Off. In hindsight, I probably should have gotten rid of Liban instead. But anyway, I ate the Northern Chicken. I did not use the dice for the additional attack, just keeping it for another turn, just keeping that damage in for another turn. So right now I've managed to bring Kokomi down to 3 HP, and I have my burst set up as well. So this means that if my opponent decides to swap out to another character, at least I would be able to deal a lot of damage to them. Also, I thought, because my opponent actually has Leave It to Me, they swapped over to Ayaka very smartly, and therefore they were able to freeze my Chongyun. So my Chongyun has all the burst set up, but essentially he is useless because he is frozen, right? So I had to swap out to another character, and I decided to swap out into Eula. Reason for that is because I needed to spread my Cyro application across to their different teams, right? So that Diluc will be able to get rid of their team members in one shot. So I went into Eula, and I'm just trying to decide if I want to go in with the elemental skill or the elemental burst. I decided to go in with the elemental skill just so that I can set up the Grimheart for a future additional 2 HP. And this is actually pretty annoying to play against this Ayaka with the Aquila Favonius, because regardless of which skill I went with, I was still only going to gain or deal 1 HP because the Ayaka was going to heal anyway. So this is a very tanky Ayaka build with both Aquila Favonius and also the Kokomi recovery. And apart from that, you can also tell that this is a team with a Hydro base, which means that they also have access to Hydro recovery, which is quite threatening because it means that you'll be able to heal 2 damage for your active character and 1 damage or 1 HP for the rest of your team. So that can mess up my calculations a little bit. So I had to play this very carefully. Next up, I just decided to heal Eula. Reason for that is because I'm just trying to set up for the next turn. I decided that, hey, I probably just lose whatever I'm trying to do right now. Even if I try to do some damage, I'm not able to kill off this Ayaka, right? So I just wanted to heal Eula up to 5 HP, because if I do that, I would be able to survive the Ayaka burst should they decide to burst at the start of the next turn. But they decided to just swap over to their Xingqiu and probably trying to set up their freeze combination between Xingqiu and Ayaka. So luckily I have Libban set up from the previous turn, which means that I have a bit more reach in this particular turn. One thing I should have done instead though is that I should have applied cryo damage to their Xingqiu just so that they can be frozen. Because right now when they use Rain Cutter, they have Hydro applied to themselves, right? What I should have done is that if I had played the elemental skill, I'll be able to do 4 damage and also force them to freeze their Xingqiu, and therefore they had to swap out during this turn, therefore wasting a turn. But that is okay, I decided to swap into Diluc instead because I can see that their entire team now has some sort of application on them, which can help me to apply Melt Reaction or Vaporize Reaction. And I thought it was quite interesting that they didn't care about my Diluc, didn't care that I had 6 dice left, didn't care that I have Chongyun online, right? So what I can do right now is that I can just spend 1 dice, swap into Chongyun, use the Gambler's Earrings, and use the and then be able to knock out Xingqiu with 8 damage due to the freeze reaction. And now I will have 2 more elemental dice in order for me to knock out 1 more character. So my opponent decides to go into Ayaka instead, which is pretty interesting, because I guess it was interesting to me because it means that next turn, when they start their turn, Ayaka no longer has the passive ability to Cyro infuse their physical damage. But then, the more I think about this, the more I realize this is actually the correct play, because on this turn, I can easily, if they were to swap out the Kokomi, I can easily knock it out with Chongyun as well, and therefore increasing my reach again through the use of Gambler's Earrings. If I do that, it means that they will not be able to sacrifice Kokomi next turn by swapping the Kokomi and swapping back to Ayaka in order to activate the freezes. So I think that was the correct play for my opponent here. And now I'm just trying to decide, do I want to go into Chongyun and deal Chongyun damage, or do I want to go into Diluc to start to deal Melt damage? I just decided to go for the Melt instead, and also went for the Shattering Eyes damage as well, because I decided that I had to deal as much damage in one shot as possible, because they have the Favonius, right? So if I fail to kill off their Ayaka in 2 hits or less, it means that they're going to heal a whole ton of damage, and means that I'm going to take a lot more action points in order to kill off the Ayaka. So playing the Shattering Eyes means that if they do not swap out the Ayaka, I can play the second Shattering Eyes and then kill off the Ayaka through the use of a Diluc normal attack or a Diluc burst. Sorry, no, a Diluc skill. And right here, I think my opponent is probably trying to think about swapping over to Kokomi just so that they will be able to activate the passive ability on the Ayaka and have Cyro infused sword attacks. And they do the same thing again, they got changing shift and leave it to me, and they swap over to Kokomi very easily again, which I was pretty annoyed by actually, because how do you draw both your changing shifts and leave it to me at the same time again the second time in a game? So yeah, I guess my opponent just got just managed to get the right cards at the right time, because it is all about the heart of the cards.
What's your battle
and instead of risking any sort of damage on my Diluc, I actually swapped over to Eula instead because I want my opponent to swap out into their Ayaka. Right now, the only thing that they can do is that they either pass their turn or they swap over to Ayaka because the Kokomi is currently frozen. But the problem here is that if they were to swap into Ayaka, I can use Shattering Ice and I'll be able to take out the Ayaka. But that's it, I just realized something. I set up the Grimheart at the start of the game and didn't even realize that I could use the Grimheart on Eula. And that's why my opponent realized that, hey, they underestimated Eula as well. They should have be quite careful of her, right? And be sure about when she can use her Grimheart. So GG to my opponent, and let's go on to the next gameplay. So in the next match, it is another freeze team, but this time instead of Ayaka, it's going to be Eula. So I see another Eula enjoyer, a fellow Eula enjoyer who is trying to figure out how to best play her. And instead of going for the melt route, they've decided to go with the freeze mechanic instead, the freeze team instead. So with that in mind, again, same thought process, I need to get rid of Xingqiu. I cannot allow them to set up their freeze turns. But knowing this team, they're probably going to go into Mona first, and therefore I'm not going to get a clean FTK. So I thought, yeah, I will attack with Chongyun first, just so that I can set up a burst for the second turn. But they actually surprised me here by not sending out Mona, and they decided to send out Xingqiu instead. That said, my game plan didn't change. I think all they're trying to do is to set up Xingqiu and set up the freeze and go over to Eula. So my game plan remains the same. I'm just going to deal cryo damage across the entire board while also trying to set up the elemental burst for turn 2 as well. So my opponent goes in for the normal attack, and luckily for me, I've already switched my Chonghua field on, which means that I am no longer dealing physical damage. Instead, I am dealing cryo damage, and therefore it does not trigger the Chang the Ninth. And here I'm just trying to consider, do I want to attack one more time just to threaten the burst attack the next turn, right? But I decided not to, because I thought it was more important to set up for the reach, and therefore I decided to play Paimon instead. But that actually proved to be quite a difficulty for me now, because my opponent decided to play the very annoying Hydro heal at the right time, therefore healing Xingqiu by 2 damage and then swapping over to Mona. And what this means is that my Chongyun is actually a little bit disadvantaged at the moment because he is now at 6 HP and he does not have his burst up, but I think this would still be fine. I think it's still playable because I have 2 Shattering Eyes in my hand, and therefore I would be able to attack Mona once, and even if they have their shield on, I can just, through the use of Mona's burst, I can basically play Shattering Eyes and play the burst and knock out that Mona through the use of my Elemental Burst. So with that in mind, I decided to be a bit more conservative with how I use my Cryo Dice. I decided to play the normal attack instead, and then they swap into Xingqiu, which is, as expected, right? Because they have the burst setup, they're just gonna come in at me, and then deal burst damage against me. But that said, I was still able to use my burst and knock out the Xingqiu. But with that in mind, since I already have Cryo applied to me, I fully expect my Chongyun to die right now, because I thought they were going to swap over to Eula and therefore deal some sort of Cryo reaction on me so that it freezes my Chongyun. But instead they decided to go back into Mona and set up for the next turn, which was an interesting play to me because I thought they would have preferred to, go in for the Eula play. But instead I see what their game plan is. They're just trying to stall me out, because even if I try to attack here, I will not be dealing too much damage since Mona has her Lotus online. And with that in mind, I feel like there was not much point in me trying to attack the Mona again. Instead, what I did is I played Iron Tang Tian. Am I going to play Iron Tang Tian? I think I play Iron Tang Tian here. I think that's the right play here. So I play it, and then I think we should probably shift into another character as well. If I were to play this all over again, I don't know what I'm thinking here at the moment, but if I were to play all over again, I would probably swap into Diluc right now, just so that I can start dealing damage over to Mona. But I guess what I'm trying to think of here is I'm trying to set up Mona's burst quite easily. I have extra reach from Paimon, and therefore I can play Mona's burst and hope to deal 6 damage per character. But yeah, I think if I were to play this again with a new fresh pair of eyes, I would probably go into Diluc and hope to kill off that Mona. So they decide to apply apply Hydro to my Eula. And this is actually pretty scary for me because it means that they can easily go into the Eula since it will be a quick swap from Mona. So here I just go for the normal attack, trying to preserve some cryo damage for the elemental burst if they allow me to go into my elemental burst. But if not, it is not the end of the world. I can probably still deal a decent chunk of damage against Eula.
Beg for mercy.
And here I think I wanted to go into Liu Su because essentially if I swap into Diluc or Chongyun, I would be able to get 1 energy from Liu Su. I'll be able to attack once more, and then I will be able to, get Iron Tang Tian to set up my final energy just to get the burst set up against my opponent. My opponent reads my thoughts, decides to go into Mona, but that is still fine for me because I can play the Shattering Ice and increase my attack to a 7 damage melt damage, and that is why I think it's so important to keep Diluc for the mid to late game because he can really take knockouts and it's super scary for my opponent. And right now, I'm just thinking about whether I want to swap over to Chongyun, because if my opponent decides to freeze my Diluc, it is essentially over. I cannot afford to lose Diluc right now. So I end my turn there, and Iron Tang Tian does not give his energy over to Diluc, it gives it to Chongyun instead. In hindsight, maybe what I should have done is to switch over to Eula, so that Iron Tang Tian's energy probably goes on to Diluc instead. And I was actually quite lucky in my draw right now because I don't mind if Chongyun dies, right? Because if he dies, I can go over to Diluc and then I can play I Haven't Lost Yet. And that is exactly what happens, right? I go over to Diluc, I have Shattering Eyes, I have the Investor's Companion, I can play I Haven't Lost Yet, and therefore go in for a 10 damage burst attack, and taking out Eula in just one fell swoop. So GG to my opponent here, really enjoyed the game. Yeah, actually had really good fun with
I'll be
Eula
back.
today. Even though she does not take out all the different opponents, she is still really fun to play with. She's a good chip damage dealer, and she is really good at turning up the heat as well. So yeah, give Eula a try. If you watched this entire video, if you have any questions, let me know, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Alright, bye.